Eric Burgess here with Music Marketing TV, and today I'm going to share with you my favorite things about FL Studio's piano roll, and you can walk away from this with some new tricks in your belt. Let's jump right into it. So this first one is one I get asked about all the time, and it is this thing. So this is a menu that allows you to, wherever your mouse is at, very quickly reach the menu that would be up here. And this is great because a lot of times, you know, the keyboard shortcuts like the cut tool and stuff, while convenient, they can be a little hard to reach, sometimes a little less convenient. So I use this menu. The way you get to this menu is you middle mouse click and then left click right after that. So it happens at the same time, middle mouse click, and you see it pops up, middle mouse click. And the other click works as well. I just never use it. So if you middle mouse right click, that will also work. Left click will work. They'll all work. Middle mouse and then just click. It'll do its thing. And I come in here a lot just to very quickly switch tools. It's a lot more convenient than running up here. And so that's one that I by far get asked the most about. The second most asked thing I get asked about is how I'm quickly switching between channels. So you can see I can go between channels here. And this is why I like to write a lot of parts on the same pattern. Anything that has the same pattern will show up here, and these are called ghost channels, which I believe are actually enabled by default now. It didn't used to be that way. So you'd go to View, or I think it's in Helpers. Helpers, Ghost Channels, Alt V. And what's great is once you have them on, you can double right click them, and you will be able to switch to whatever channel that is. And if you're ever a little confused on what channel you're on, you can see the name of it. So these are the drums. I could go over here. I'm on the IDK channel. I didn't give it the greatest name. It's a voice thing. And so this is just a great way to work. And this is by far the second most commonly asked thing I get asked. All right. The next one is one where if you are a sample library user and you use a plugin that hosts multiple channels, for example, if I come into if I open up, for example, Contact, I've got a Contact here and a bunch of instruments. And so some people will open up a separate instance of Contact for it, but Contact can output and respond to different MIDI channels. So like channel 2 controls the action strikes, channel 3 controls the trumpets, on and on and on. There's this great plugin I use called BRSO Articulate, which is available in the .flp format, FL Studio's native plugin format. And this plugin simplifies a ton of things. Because it's a more specialized tip, I'm only just going to say that what it allows you to do is when you have an instrument, and you can use this with a whole bunch of other instruments, any VST, I'm just using Contact in this case. If you have an instrument that uses key switches, like I have here, what you can do is you could come in, and what you do is you create a BRSO Articulate to work on that same channel and the same port as Contact. And when you're in here, when you want to switch articulations, you can simply change the MIDI channel, which brings me to my next thing if you're going to use this. So right now, let me go ahead and solo this. So you can hear it doing its thing. And there's no key switches down here. None of them. All of it's just MIDI channel. It's amazing. Actually, several DAWs have now added this, and it's very recent. This used to be pretty much FL exclusive. Blake Robinson, the guy who made it, is just an amazing, he's an amazing composer as well. But anyways, focusing on this, if I want to switch these, one thing that I would always have a hard time with was putting in the notes again, because, you know, if I want to switch them after the fact or try out some different things, what you can actually do is you can select mini. So you hold Control, click, drag to select a whole bunch. And then you can go, for example, let's say that I want to try out staccato down. And you hit Alt-C. Specifically, it has to be the left Alt in C. And it will change. You'll see the color changes because it switches to that MIDI channel. And I can very quickly go through and work like this. So if you're a Contact user or any other sample-based instrument user that uses key switches, this plugin's amazing. It's super phenomenal, and it takes advantage of the fact that FL Studio's piano roll has these extra channels available, and so really cool plugin. All right, the next one is one that I don't actually use a whole lot, but I know some people live and die by this thing, and that is the Chord Tool. So if I come in here and put down, let's just say that you've written out a melody. you really like your melody. And this gives us a chance to really quick talk about placing notes, which is also phenomenal. So whatever note you placed last or clicked on last is the next note that'll be placed. It'll be the same length. So if you place a shorter note, it'll be that same length. This goes a really long way, and as a behavior, I don't know why every other piano roll doesn't seem to do that. This is amazing. This is truly amazing that you can do this. So let's say that you write out a riff, and let's just say, you know, you're trying to be scary or something. So you're doing this like thing where you go down a half step. Maybe you come up one, and then you can hit shift click drag to clone notes. Or if you want to clone a selection, like just right at the end, you can actually make a selection and you can hit Control B. And it will clone it, the selection to the end of it. So you could perfectly clone segments, which is extremely popular. Control B is awesome if you don't have any gaps. So the reason I made a selection was because I had a gap here. So if I Control B with just this gap, it pops it at the end of the last note, which is undesirable. But let's say that I had a note here. Then when I Control B, it like perfectly lines up. So this is another thing that's really popular, super fast way of, you know, very quickly adding a bunch of things. So that's pretty stellar right there. So let's say that we've got this, but you're not the strongest with chords. You don't even maybe know how to build chords, but you know that there are minor ones and those like sound darker and maybe scary. And then there are major ones which tend to sound happier. And then there are these more complex chords that may be a bit nebulous to you, but you'd like to mess with them. So what you could do is you could say, well, C seems to be like the big note. That's like the one that's the most important here, it looks like. So you'll put a C down, and then you could come in, you could go to stamp, and then they have all these different chords. They got a bunch in here that you can use. But we're just going to go with a minor chord, and you can place one down, and boom, there you go. You got yourself a minor chord. And then maybe you want to try out like, hey, what would this sound like? We go to stamp. Let's try out a minor seventh, and let's go ahead and see what that would sound like. And away you go. Now, of course, I haven't done anything. This sound needs a lot of work, but you're very quickly writing. The notes are less tedious to come to you. So this is a very popular tool. There's also some scales and things. So if you want to work with a scale highlighted, what a lot of people like to do is use the ghost channel. And what you'll do is you'll come over here, you'll get scales. And let's say you want to work with the minor pentatonic. You can click, drop it down, start it wherever you want to start it, and boom, these are all the notes that are in your scale. And then they'll drag them out, and then you can mute them. You hold down the right Alt, and you click drag. You see how it goes to mute, and you can mute the scale. So now, if I play, you won't hear this, but you can copy this up and down an octave. I'm just shift click dragging. And so now we've got the scale all over the place. And you could come in, you can add another FL keys. My goodness, I cannot type today. And you could come in and you can write in and you could see exactly what notes are in the scale. Now I should point out that there is scale highlighting. If you go to helpers, scale highlighting, you could pick a scale. But as you can see here, the scale itself, it's not as stand-outish as these are. So some people still like these because they stand out a lot more. That's another popular thing people like to do to sort of make up for maybe not the strongest music theory knowledge. This makes it so you're not constantly wondering what notes are in the scale and which ones aren't. And if you're being chromatic in any kind of a way, it's a lot more obvious. And you can say, well, maybe this is the problem. You could push the note onto one of the safer notes. I do want to briefly mention quantizing. It's a thing. There's like several different kinds of quantizing, but it's such a common feature that I'm just not going to cover it right here. But it is there. It basically corrects mistiming. If you don't know what quantization is, it'll push notes to the nearest snap setting. So I'm not going to cover it here just because of how common it is. I will cover the strum tool, however. So the strum tool, when I play notes, right? You can't really hear that, but when you're playing on the keyboard, you don't hit every note at the exact same time. Maybe you're writing in a guitar part with some sort of a sample library, right? There's some strumming that's going on, so the notes are hit over time. They're not all hit exactly at the same time. So what you could do is you could select the notes. And by the way, when you select notes, you specifically only change things about those notes. So for example, I could bring down the velocity of just those notes, and the C up here is left alone. This would be the C. If I highlight it, you see it turns red. So that's another pretty handy thing. So let's say I want to make these strum. Well, you could do it a couple ways. I could zoom in and I could, hold Alt and then move notes, very slightly off the grid. But since we use the stamp tool, they get treated as a group. But what you can do is you can use the strum tool. And this works with just any set of notes you select. So we're going to hit Alt S. And it's got to be the left Alt, I believe. And you hit Alt S, brings up the strum tool, and you can move the notes over time. And let's bring their velocities up. Let's go ahead, exit out of this, bring the velocities back up. Hit Alt S. And you get that. So with really long, big chords, it can sound really nice. It can really add a lot of more realism to parts where this is relevant. The next thing that is extremely useful is the quick chop tool. So if I have a note here, let's say I'm writing in hi-hats for a trap beat or something. It's very common you want those rolls, right? And one thing you can do in FL is you can hit Control U or Alt U, and it will bring up the chopper. And the chopper will allow you to split a note into multiplier. It'll basically multiply the notes. So you have so many notes in the same amount of time. So you can very quickly get those rolls going on. Or you can make some black MIDI music. So whatever sort of floats your boat. You have a bunch of other modifiers here, but just in general, the quick chop, Alt U, or you can use Control U, and it will do it'll just chop it right, whatever the division of your grid is. So if we go up in our division to let's say fourths and we hit Control U, it'll split it to the grid. So Alt U is generally going to be the one you want because Alt U gives you the option to sort of pick, which is going to be a little more handy usually. But that's the quick chopper, very useful in drums. It's something that most other piano rolls typically have some form of it, and when it's just missing completely, it is sorely missed. All right, so this tip is probably my biggest one for you, and it's a lot more fundamental, and it is to use the pen tool mainly. You generally don't need to switch to the other tools. The pen tool has a modifier key that will switch you to act like that tool. For example, say I'm placing in a note, I'm adjusting the note. I might place another one. You can copy notes very efficiently. But say I want to cut the note. Well, if you hit the right shift. I even reached for the right shift. I looked down to make sure it was the right shift. But anyways, right shift, it's more of muscle memory now. And you click drag, you can make cuts. And this allows you to, so you can use Alt and very quickly move things on and off the grid. You don't need to switch to there. And if you do, use this menu. Don't use the other menu. Another tool the pen tool pretty much completely replaces is the mute tool. So if you come in here and hold down the right Alt and click drag. See, I'm used to not having to say it out loud. So this is all just muscle memory for me. I have to remember if it's the right or the left one. So, but you can see we've muted these notes. So maybe we're trying out a new melody. We're like, oh, no. But maybe you want to keep it later. Maybe it'll come in handy. So you can quickly mute things. This works on the playlist area too, which is more where I use this. I don't use mute as often in the piano roll. There's more, but I feel like this is just a ton of information. I'm going to leave you with just those tips. There's a ton more actually. For example, we could take the piano roll over here and you can actually replace these with labels. It's a little more involved. But if you have a sample library that has drums, you can label what drums are on what keys. You can do, there's a ton of stuff that you can really do with this. Simply a phenomenal piano roll. I think the main reason it works so well is because of how versatile the pen tool is. And moving around, the way notes are placed, and the way multiple selections work, which I guess to end with, let's end with multiple selection and deselecting. So I see a lot of people when they make selections, they'll come up here and hold Control and click in order to deselect. So if you hold Control, it will deselect you. However, I don't get consistent behavior all the time, or at least in the past I didn't, and it got so bad that I went and I just looked for is there a keyboard shortcut. And there is. If you select a bunch of things and you want to deselect them, just hit Control D So you actually never see me move up here now. It's a lot more rare. Usually to just place where I want to start playback. Because you can just hit Control D and it deselects. So that's one that I use a ton. And if I select a region or a group of notes by holding Control and clicking, I can hit Control D. It'll deselect all those things for me. So that's a very handy one. And then multiple selections. So one of the great things is if you select, a very specific group of things, you can draw lines in the, say for the velocities, you want these to get louder, but only these notes. Maybe it's a drum library and those are like the bass drum hits, and then the rest are like cymbals and snares. You don't want to touch that stuff. Well, you can do that by simply selecting them individually, and by doing that you hold Control and Shift to add new notes. If you don't want to add a new note, if you just want to start a new selection, just keep holding Control and click drag. So this is really great if you have like some really specific notes you want to go after. And another really great thing, let's say that I've got here a bunch of notes. Let's say that I want them to have a smooth ramp. Let's say I want these ones to be smooth ramping upwards over time. You can right click in the velocity area and drag down, and it will create a linear progression upwards, which is fantastic. So these will get louder and louder and louder. If this is linked to something other than velocity, it's going to change that parameter smoothly over time. So I'm going to leave you with just those. Again, there's a lot more. We didn't even get to the automation capabilities inside the piano roll and how it's different than the playlist and when you would use one versus the other. There's just a ton of things we could keep going. The piano roll is so fundamental towards my production workflow that it is the main reason I was attracted to FL. It's just how quick the piano roll is to work with. If you have any questions about this, feel free to drop them down in the comments. If you have a dope tip that I didn't cover, drop it down. I've learned a lot of really cool things from comments. That's where I picked up the Alt-C trick for changing the colors, was a comment. Someone finally answered a question I had where I was like, how do you do this? Is there a thing for this? And that was done via a comment. So definitely share your knowledge down below. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day.